Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sunset TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. The Supreme Court on Monday referred the plea seeking legal validation of same-sex marriages to a 5-judge constitution bench for adjudication. A bench headed by Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud called it a seminal issue, saying the submissions on the matter involve an interplay between constitutional rights on the one hand and special legislative enactments, including the Special Marriage Act on the other. Now, the centre has opposed in the top court the batch of petitions which are seeking legal validation of same-sex marriages, claiming that they will cause a complete havoc with the delicate balance of personal laws and accepted societal values. So, further arguments on the matter will now be heard on the 18th of April, and proceedings will be live-streamed, as is done in case of hearings before the Constitution Bench's hearing. What the Supreme Court's pronouncement will be is something that we'll have to wait for. But we will discuss today the contentions that have been made on the matter, what the petitioners have been demanding, and why the centre has a different stand. Let me introduce the panelists to you. We have with us in the studio Mr. Deshratan Nigam, Advocate, Supreme Court of India, and joining us virtually our two guests, Mr. Rahul Ishwar, author and activist, and Mr. Harish Iyer, equal rights activist. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program. Mr. Iyer, to you first. You've been an equal rights activist and quite vocal. We've seen over the past few years when the 377 debate was going on. Today, the Supreme Court has referred the matter to a larger 5-judge constitution bench. How do you look at this development?
I think it is a progressive move. This is exactly what happened during Section 377 as well. Section 377. We had absolutely no hopes with any government. I'm not referring to one particular government, whether it is irrespective of which party is on the centre. We have never really had any hopes, pinned any hopes on them. And in fact, it's the utter failure of governments to actually do what they should be doing best. Having debates, having discussions, having sensible conversations, opening their minds to newer ideas and newer ways of interpreting various laws is something that the Constitution, that our lawmakers, which is our elected officials, should be doing. But rather, we have always had to rely on the courts to do the right thing.
But, Mr. Nigam, the centre has a completely different stand. The argument what is being made is now that after 377 was decriminalized, it was believed, and what was seen also as a logical next step would be to see a legalization, a validation of same-sex marriage. On the other side, what we're seeing is a completely different stand from the centre. What is the centre's contention? What is the centre worried about when it says that it is going to create a complete havoc in society?
Well, Tina ji, in fact, the petition is being considered by Supreme Court under Article 142. 142.1 clearly says that Supreme Court in exercise of its jurisdiction, which means what is within their jurisdiction, they can hear. The second part of the argument is that any order is subject to the laws passed by the Parliament. These are two very important conditions under 142. And therefore, the stand of the Supreme Court is that this legislation or making of the law in this particular subject belongs to legislative domain, because it has grave consequences for the society as a whole, reactions, what will be its reaction. So, once it is taken to the Parliament, the parliamentarians who represent the will of the people who have been elected, they will consider what are the views of the public. I am not saying whether the law has to be there or not there. It is to be discussed. It is not the Supreme Court that will legislate on the matter. I am very clear on the subject, because if Supreme Court starts making law, that would be the end of the democracy. They are there to fill the gaps or to interpret the laws.
So that's why the law minister says that it becomes a policy matter. But what about 377 then? Was that not a policy matter, and why did the government not come in then?
Let me tell you, government and parliament are two different things. Government is executive, parliament is legislative domain. They may have been silent, but that does not necessarily mean they should be silent on this issue also. Now, decriminalization of the sex under 377 is within the room, what they do within the room. But marriage is a societal concept. So the society comes into the picture. Once the society comes into the picture, the consequences, the relevance, implications of the society, whether they are there or not, has to be discussed in Parliament. And Parliament will give it a call.
Okay. I want you to come in, Mr. Rahul Ishwar, on this. So when we say the society is not ready, it is going to create havoc, perhaps because there are inhibitions, there are apprehensions from, a larger population. But by doing so, are we not discriminating against those who also are part of society, who also have been given the right to love and choose their partner and have a family, which necessarily is not, the partner may not be from the opposite sex?
Two humble submissions, Tinaji. I'm a Hindu right conservative activist. I respectfully disagree with my good friend Harish and the entire paradigm of homosexual marriages. There are scientific inhibitions, there are academic questions or points of view that needs to be debated. But one thing I believe everyone will agree is we should all say no to homophobia. We should all say no relation to homosexual community, because the community is very sensitive. There are people who who have their own concerns. So I totally respect their position. Having said that, for example, there are scientific apprehensions like, do we have a gay gene? Have we discovered a gay gene? Is it environmental? Is it by birth? There are a lot of scientific questions that needs to be debated. Scientists like Simon Levy, who himself belongs to the gay community, have discovered or searched deep in the topic, and there has been statements like, no, I have not discovered a gay gene. So there are some academic scientific debates there. But along with that, like Deshodhan Nigamji rightly pointed out, marriage for centuries have been a heterosexual monogamous marriage relationship that was the more prominent form of procreation and family for centuries. So naturally, there are many people who will be having an inhibition and reservation regarding the same. So the way forward is more discussion, sensitization. Let lawmakers, people's representative, everyone debate and discuss it more and more. We all respect Sri Chandrachud, who is a very eminent judge coming from a very eminent judicial family. We all know he is of a progressive proclivity. So he may be going ahead with a particular course of action or a sense of verdict. At the same point of time, larger discussion need to be there, because at the end of the day, more important than legal acceptance is social acceptance. Legal acceptance can be a start point, but social acceptance is what Harish ji and the community should strive to. That needs more sensitization, more talking, more understanding, and more conversation. Then only they will be able to gather and garner more social acceptance. So that's one point that they should consider.
That's an important point, but on the contrary, Mr. Nigam, there's also an argument that there is no social acceptance because there is no law. So once there is legal acceptance, perhaps the society will begin to accept. And we've seen how that happens. So there have been practices that the society has been, working with. But as we evolve, as we become more progressive, we abolish those practices because we thought that they are necessary evils. So as we evolve, can we also not consider that this is something which is discriminatory to a section of our society?
See, let me tell you. Tina ji, you can't put the cart before the horse. And the legislation does not work. First we make a legislation and then the social acceptance and the social call will be there. The legislation is always made by the parliamentarians once there is a call by the people which is taken to the parliament, either through their manifestos, they put it before. All the political parties do it. They put things in the manifesto, even if it is not there in manifesto. If there is a demand from the people, which means the majority of the people of this country, then parliamentarians are bound to take up that call. They cannot ignore that call by the people because parliament reflects the will of the people. The moment the call or the pressure is on the parliamentarians, they will be the first one to pick it and make the law. And therefore, today, if the parliament is not making that call, which means there is no sufficient social acceptance or social pressure on them, believe me, otherwise parliamentarians don't want to lose their votes. So it is not the reverse which you are saying. It is first the call and the social pressure and the social demand has to be there, then the law comes into the picture. It is not the other way around. We are living in parliamentary democracy and parliamentarians represent, irrespective of the political parties, the will of the people.
So suppose the Supreme Court, gives a verdict which is in favor of the rights activist, and suppose the Supreme Court accepts that this is a right that they must be accorded. What happens then? Will the government come in and say that because there is no social acceptance, there can be no law as such?
See, let me tell you, if Supreme Court makes that law, it becomes a law, no doubt, but it should not make a law. It should only interpret the law. I said democracy will be in danger the moment Supreme Court starts legislation. Now, secondly, if you make this a law, its social acceptance, as Rahul Ishwar clearly pointed out, becomes a question. Please remember the judgment of Jallikattu. Supreme Court passed it, people did not accept it. Then there was a legislation by the state government. Please remember. So, a judgment cannot be ahead of its time, because that is within the domain of the parliament. If you make a law which is ahead of its time, people either will not implement it, there will be issues and problems in the society. Yes, there will be few acceptances here and there, but overall, if you look at the society has to make a call.
Okay.
Through their parliamentarians, through the mass movement which is there. So first create a mass movement, mass awareness about it. I am not saying, I may have my personal view, that's a separate issue. But then this is a larger call, which all implications, consequences, everything is to be discussed, which Supreme Court is not competent. The legislature, our parliamentarians and the parliament is competent to legislate because it is within their exclusive domain. I do respect Mr. Nayyar and people similarly situated, but the fact remains legislation has to respect the entire society.
Okay.
Not few individuals.
Mr. Iyer, Mr. Nigam spoke about Jallikattu. I have another example, the Sabarimala verdict. So the court said yes, people said no. And this is where the people's will prevails. So something which is not acceptable to society is not acceptable even if there is a law. Then can we say that it's too early? Perhaps we need to discuss it more. There should be more awareness. There should be a mass movement, as Mr. Nigam cited out, and perhaps then demand.
When is a good time then? Can we mark it 4 years down the line, 2 years down the line, 20 years down the line, 15 years down the line? When is a good time to do something like that? This is something that, first of all, it's not creating a new law, it's interpreting the law. Interpreting the law in a way so as to allow any two people to marry each other, regardless of their gender. Okay, that's the first point that I want to make. Secondly, when is a good time? I mean, if we had to wait, and if the majoritarian view will persist in this country, then everything would be a cisgender, heterosexual, male Hindu, Brahminical lens that we will be looking at all the time, because that's the majority of people in the parliament. Okay, the parliament doesn't have enough women. The women reservation bill has been taken so many years to even go through a proper discussion in the parliament. So the idea is more the government's point of view sounds more, rather than a reaction or this thing, it sounds more like a threat. It sounds more like, what it's going to create a havoc, means we'll create the havoc. LGBT people are not going to create the havoc. Who's going to create the havoc if there is a law of this kind? Who are these lumpen elements who will create an havoc in society if they decide, if the law so decides that two men can fall in love with each other and they can get married? And also Section 377. Section 377 has only decriminalized us, like me and another man or another woman or anybody for that matter, another trans person, having sex with each other, okay, as long as it's consensual. There is no rights that has been given to us. We still afford rights to only heterosexual and cisgendered people in this country. And that has to change. Our constitution cannot be preferential. Our constitution has to be uniform and for everybody, even those minorities who exist in the society. So if we have to leave everything to the parliament, as I said, everything would be Brahminical, cisgendered, heterosexual, and
yes,
that's how things would
okay.
be.
Yes, Mr. Ishwar, come in on this. Yes.
Just two submissions. One, I would humbly urge my good friend Harish ji to be more cautious in using words like Brahminical, because they have loaded meanings given by many sections of people in many sense. No, our Brahmin community has been one of the backbones of Indian culture for long. That's a different debate. But two submissions to you. One, Harish ji, I'm a very normal person. See, I respect, even in Shabarimala debate, I was in jail for a long period of time. We were begging and imploring Supreme Court to listen to us, and thankfully, your lordships have listened to us. But the larger point is educate people like me. I'm a very ordinary person. I'm neither a great intellectual nor progressive. I'm a very ordinary person like me. Ordinary people like me would need more engagement, education, and sensitization from the community in a broader way. The government has to carry the will of the people. We cannot blame the government for carrying the will of a huge section of people. And the government is rightfully raising apprehension. Even in foreign nations, there are having apprehensions. But we all agree on principle that homophobia is bad, discrimination is bad. At the same point of time, the community, I don't know what Supreme Court will decide, the community should go on with a very soft, educative or soft, sensitizing vision in a much more larger way. That's the only way ahead. We should converse.
Okay, Mr. Iyer, I'll come back to you, but just a clarity from Mr. Nigam on what the law exactly says. Mr. Nigam, amid this argument, what I really want to understand is, does our law restrict spousal relationship between two individuals from the opposite sex? Does it restrict? And what is the definition of family? So when the government argues that people of the same sex cannot have a family, what is the definition as per Indian law of a family?
Let
What
me
is
tell
my
you one
family?
thing. As of now, the law does not permit same-sex marriages. Reason being, under the Hindu law or the Muslim law, the Christian law, they are prohibited. Now, secondly, the people cite about the Special Marriage Act that it is a union between two persons. Now, here two persons through customs or otherwise have been interpreted as man and women. Right? Family could be anything. Family could be a set of only 4 female members. If there are no male members or they are dead, they could be a family. But here it is something beyond that. Sex is within a room, a very private thing. Marriage is social, which has social implications. What you do within your room, government is not going to peep inside. But the moment the concept of marriage comes, it becomes a public issue, a social issue. And let me also point out, the same-sex marriage is not an Indian concept, Indian civilizational concept. It's a concept which is coming from outside. We have various forms of marriage, at least 8 forms that I know in our civilization which is there. None talks about between the same sex. So we have our own traditions which is continuing, which is seeped in our society. And the law which is made comes through the customs which are following through the ages and the present demand. Is the present, we have between a man and woman, this is an age-old concept which is going on. Is the present concept and demand is so much as to compel the parliament to make a law in favor of such? That issue has to be debated. I am nobody to say that it exists or it does not exist. Let the parliament make a call. Let the majority of the parliament, because parliamentary democracy works through majority. That's the system that we have chosen.
Okay. That's an interesting point, and let me get in Mr. Ishwar again on this. Mr. Ishwar, taking on from what Mr. Nigam is saying, the fact that it is something that we have taken on from our traditions and customs, but wasn't sati a custom also that we practiced? Wasn't dowry a custom that we've practiced, but that was ultimately abolished? Even today when we talk about it, we realize that it was discriminatory. We have had progressive laws by this very government. We've banned triple talaq. We've spoken about reproductive rights, which are very, very different and progressive from countries like the United States. So why, when we talk about equality, why are we not considering this group of people who are demanding nothing but a legalization of their relationship? And marriage is more than just consensual sex. It is about companionship. It is about a lot of other rights that these people are demanding. So can we not, in a population of 1.4 billion, can we not accommodate the happiness, the rights of this group of people?
Rahul, just 1 second. Rahul, 1 second.
Oh, yes.
All these things were done through legislation, through parliament. Please remember that.
I was about
Okay, yes. Mr.
just two submissions. As Deshrathan Nigamji rightly pointed out, there was a social pressure to change things like Sati, and we have evolved from it. Great campaigners like Raja Ram Mohan Roy ji, who is one of the greatest, reformists that we have, or Swami Vivekananda against casteism. We had Mahatma Gandhi, Guruji Golwalkar, so many people from that time, who were, or Veera Savarkar ji, who wanted more reform from inside. So all these things were done by legislative route, as rightly pointed by Deshrathan Nigamji. Second, see, the community should be respected. That lack of or no homophobia should be there. These are all absolutely given. Nobody is contesting that. But when the title of marriage, which is having a totally different connotation in society, is accorded, there are a lot of subsequential or consequential question that comes. One regarding divorce. Under which law are they going to get married? Under which law they are going to get divorced? What about inheritance? What about adoption? All the other angles are also coming. So that needs a legislative, rather that needs much more deliberation from the lawmakers. Is a very legitimate position that government can take. Maybe Supreme Court will overrule the aspect, and we are all bound to respect Supreme Court because it's a law of the land. But there are a lot of other things that are associated too. For example, inheritance, adoption, and similar things should be deliberated by the will and wisdom of the parliament too. That we cannot discount. That's the reason why I was requesting people like Harish ji to create more awareness. A huge majority of media is supporting your rights and your community in a very positive way. They are giving news and debates in such a supporting way too. So raise mass awareness, like Deshrathan Nigamji said. Educate people who may have different point of view. I had a slightly different point of view earlier, but I mellowed down and understood because I met a friend from the community and I understood more from regarding him. I understood that many of the false notions I had were injected from the movies or injected from some kind of false serials that we have. So there is a process of education, sensitization, but only one request: the wisdom of parliament cannot be overridden. The wisdom of parliament.
So, Mr. Iyer, then are we knocking on the wrong door? Then, when we know that the parliament has the power, it reflects the will of the people, then should we not taking the route of the parliament instead of going the judiciary way?
I think,
Mr. Iyer.
Okay. So one of the things is, if we had to leave it to the will of the parliament, okay, how many debates and discussions have they had on Section 377? Let's look at Section 377. Even on Section 377, the Shashi Tharoor raised a bill, and if you'd up the volume when you actually listen to that, you will see people. I will not name whether it's right wing, left wing, whether it's people from the Congress party. Congress itself wasn't there in full attendance in the parliament when Shashi Tharoor raised the bill. And there were jibes which were thrown at him. So you don't even have a respectable debate in the parliament, a respectable discussion in the parliament. We are treated as subhuman when we have these discussions. One of the things that we need to do, and which we should have done, is while we actually gave the verdict of Section 377, it should imply for other laws. And what Rahul speaks about is very important. Yes, this will lead to other laws as well. What about the problem I see right now is the problem with gay marriage is gay divorce. So let us have gay divorce as well. Interpret other laws as well. But let's begin somewhere. And let the change begin somewhere. If there are two people falling in love, it doesn't spoil any fabric of any society. If I get married to my boyfriend, my neighbor is not going to get married to his best friend just because he's there, unless and until he happens to be someone from the LGBTQ community. We are not influencing anything. I live in a heterosexual world every day. I haven't gotten influence till now to get married to a woman. Okay, and it'll be disastrous if I get influenced that way too.
Taking on from what all three of you have said and the importance that this subject, demands, the question from a younger generation would be, and I've heard a lot of youngsters talk about it as well, and the general sense is that in an age where when we are talking about futuristic technologies like AI, why should we, not work towards happiness of people? So wherein an unhappy marriage between people of, opposite gender, vis-a-vis a happy marriage between people of the same sex.
I'll answer that.
Can we not progress as a society where happiness matters more than acceptance?
See,
that's a general sense from youngsters.
Happiness certainly matters. Now, in order to make that happiness of few people into concrete legislation, where do you go? Let's not go around in circles. Where do you? You have got to go to the parliament.
Absolutely,
And the younger generation needs to be made aware of it. Therefore, social pressure. And therefore, one thing, India is not just few metropolitan cities. India is too vast, and the entire population is a part of a democratic process. And they are the ones who send people to the parliament. They have to understand, not just 2 or 3 intellectuals sitting in a TV studio. It has to go through a parliament. The Supreme Court can make a law, but legislative powers is not their domain.
But the change has to begin in society. That's the most important thing.
Yes, society. All laws, whether sati, any laws, they have come through legislative process and a wider discussion through the discussion in parliament. They were the part of legislative domain. Even if Supreme Court makes the law, and as we rightly discussed, you also gave the example of Sabrimala, I gave Jallikattu, they will not be implemented on the ground. There will be social reaction. We don't want that social reaction against them. So let there be a pace with which the law must develop naturally, not imposed. That's a difference that I want to point out.
Absolutely. So when there is demand in society, the lawmakers work towards it and bring in a law. Time allows me to take up just one last comment from you, Mr. Ishwar, and then we'll wrap up. Yes.
One submission, the larger point being, I would urge Harish ji that, it is a long road ahead, that there should be continuous debate, discussion, because there's a huge apprehension on many people on the other side, and we should be mindful about it. We should be careful about it. That kind of apprehension should be taken into, and like Deshradam Nikunji said, see, the will and wish of the parliament cannot be bypassed. There needs to be consensus. And one more thing, Hindu community have been largely tolerant of the sexual diversity. We also have our Christian, Muslim and the Semitic communities where they believe that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because of such. There are many interpretations and narratives like this. So, every great change may take time, but you have to convey. At the same point of time, there is a great sanctity to marriage. I'm a normal conservative person. I have my own apprehensions and inhibitions. So it will take time for evolution. You cannot wish for things to change overnight. Respectful engagement with parliament, will of the people, respectfully, without any kind of negativity, we should take it positively ahead. That's the only way.
Absolutely. And as we debate, let's not forget that it's the parliament that makes the laws. And even if, if the will of the people is not reflected in parliament, the parliament refrains from that. So perhaps as all our panelists have suggested, maybe it's too early to accept that kind of change. There will be social reaction to that kind of change if it happens, and to not disturb the social fabric until and unless there is wider acceptance from society. So that really is the status at the moment. Let's see what the Supreme Court has to say when the final arguments are made on the 18th of April and what the Supreme Court's pronouncement will be. But with that, I'll have to wrap up this discussion today. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program today and sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sunset TV.